Howdy folks, and welcome to a preview. I must stress this right at the start of this video before everybody gets far too carried away. This is not a review. The game's barely even into alpha test yet, but this preview of Obsidian Software's Armoured Warfare. Now, unless you've been living under a rock for the last 6 months, and if you have even the slightest interest in tanks and armoured fighting vehicles in general, and let's face it, if you're watching my videos, you probably have an interest in tanks, then you've probably heard of Armoured Warfare. 500,000 people have signed up for the beta test, and there is still time, if you're interested, to sign up for the beta. Link in the video description to the Armoured Warfare website where you can apply for a chance to be selected to test this game out in the beta, which is starting very, very soon. And just as a little extra piece of motivation, if you do sign up before the 18th of January, they're giving away a free tank commander. Regardless of whether you get selected for the beta or not, when the game is released, you can claim the free tank commander and use it. Free tank commander, Jingles? What are you talking about? Well, that's one of the reasons why Armoured Warfare is slightly different from what you may be expecting. And it really shouldn't come as any surprise, given that the game's been developed by Obsidian Entertainment. I did mention, these guys are more known for their role-playing games than they are for games like this. And they're bringing some of that role-playing expertise to the table in Armoured Warfare. The whole tank commander system is one of the things that makes this different from games like World of Tanks and games like War Thunder. But more on that and the crew system in general in a moment. For now, let's just concentrate on the tanks. What kind of tanks can you expect to see in Armoured Warfare? Well, if it isn't obvious from looking at the background footage, they're going to be modern tanks. Unlike World of Tanks and War Thunder, which concentrate on pre, during and just after World War II, Armoured Warfare, the earliest models of tanks that you're going to have access to in this game are going to be 1950s and onwards, all the way up to the present day. So, what kind of tanks are you actually going to be able to get your hands on and play in Armoured Warfare? Well, just using the word tank is actually quite misleading. There are a whole range of different armoured fighting vehicles available. The 5 classes of vehicle in Armoured Warfare are Main Battle Tank, Light Tank, Tank Destroyer, Self-Propelled Gun, and Armoured Reconnaissance Vehicle. So, taking a quick look at some of the examples from each class, we'll start with Main Battle Tanks, and this is the Soviet T-90A. It's essentially a modernised version of the T-72. As well as the main tank gun, it features a guided missile launcher and is protected by explosive reactive armour. And just in case you were wondering, yes, explosive reactive armour will protect your tank from hits from guided missiles, or at least it will the first time you take a hit from a guided missile. Once the explosive reactive armour has been blown off, the actual tank armour underneath it becomes significantly weakened. Next, tank destroyers. The kind of tank destroyers that you're going to see in Armoured Warfare are probably not the sort of things that you may be expecting if you played a game like World of Tanks, for example. Tank destroyers in Armoured Warfare are vehicles like the M1182 mobile gun system. It's a wheeled tank destroyer. It's very, very mobile, and it features, well, they call it the M68A2 gun, but it's basically the British Royal Ordnance L7 because it's a great gun and everybody uses it. It's the American version of the same gun. Next up, light tanks, and we're all used to thinking of the light tank as the scout vehicle of this kind of game. Very fast, very manoeuvrable, terrible guns, terrible armour. Well, Armoured Warfare already features an entirely different class of vehicles as the scouts, the Armoured Reconnaissance Vehicles. So what the hell's a light tank for? Well, it's probably safer if you think of Armoured Warfare's light tanks as being the medium tanks in a game like War Thunder or World of Tanks. Have a look, for example, at the Stingray II. That's a 105mm rifle bore cannon. That is definitely not a poorly armed machine. As a light tank driver in Armoured Warfare, your job is to support the main battle tank from the front line by working your way around the flanks and providing direct fire support using your big gun, while being careful to try not to take any hits because the armour on the Stingray II is only good enough to stop 23mm cannon shells. Now, you may be sitting there thinking to yourself, and quite rightfully so, why the hell would I want to drive something as thinly armoured as a Stingray 2 or an M1182 tank destroyer when I could just be driving the main battle tank? You know, they've got the same gun, and the main battle tank has armour, and that's a good point. But machines like the light tank Stingray 2 and the tank destroyer M1182 get to do something that most of the main battle tanks, like the T-90, don't do, and that's the ability to deploy smoke screens. And here you can see a Striker 2 and shortly an M1182 doing exactly that, advancing across open ground while concealing their tank from enemy fire by deploying a smoke grenade barrage ahead of them as they move. Of course, you're also going to have the option of fitting your tank with a kind of equipment that can pinpoint enemy targets even through the concealment provided by a smokescreen. But it's a trade-off. Enabling your tank to have that kind of capability means you have to sacrifice a different kind of capability elsewhere. But before we start getting too lost in the details, we still have two other classes of vehicles to look at: self-propelled guns and armoured reconnaissance vehicles. Vehicles like the German Army's Weasel 1 AWC. What is it that sets these things apart? What can these things do that the main battle tanks, the tank destroyers, the light tanks and the self-propelled guns can't do? Well, they have the ability to designate a target. If you're being lit up by an armoured reconnaissance vehicle, your tank is going to take increased damage from absolutely everything for the duration of the time that you are being lit up, until you manage to successfully break line of sight between yourself and whichever vehicle is lighting you up. It's party time for the enemy team, as long as they're shooting at you. So that's main battle tanks, light tanks, tank destroyers, armoured reconnaissance vehicles. What's left? Oh yeah, the elephant in the room, the one that nobody wants to talk about, the self-propelled guns. Yes, there is artillery in armoured warfare, and straight away all the World of Tanks players have thrown their hands up in disgust and have walked out. Oh, that's it, I'm not playing this game if there's artillery in it, I'm going to Azerbaijan. Well, hang on a minute. It all depends on how they implement it. So, what is it about artillery that grinds everybody's gears in a game like World of Tanks, for example? Is it because you're sitting there in your heavy tank, minding your own business, when suddenly, boom, no warning, 2/3 of your health is gone, half your crew is dead, your ammo rack's been knocked out, and all your tracks have been blown off? Yeah, that probably sums it up. That's probably the thing that people hate about artillery. The fact that you can get destroyed from the other side of the map without the slightest chance of being able to defend yourself. And it doesn't matter that happens actually quite rarely in World of Tanks. That's the perception that people have, because it happens often enough to piss people off to an uncommon degree. I can recall one game in particular. In fact, every time you say artillery in World of Tanks to me, the first thing I think of is driving my IS-7 on the Fjords map, and literally the first shot fired in the game was an armor-piercing shot from a T-92, and it was a great shot from the T-92, but he left me on 300 health, knocked out 3 of my crew, destroyed my ammo rack and my engine, and blew both of my tracks off. The first shot fired in the game. Does that happen every time you play? No, of course it doesn't. Does it happen often enough to make you hate artillery? Oh yes. Well, that's just not going to happen. Not in armoured warfare. Artillery isn't going to do that kind of alpha damage. As well as that, you're always going to get a warning when you're being targeted by a self-propelled gun. It might not be much of a warning, it might only be a couple of seconds, but you're going to have time to do something about it and not just sit there and get hit. Same goes for anti-tank guided missiles. If anybody is targeting you with an anti-tank guided missile or a self-propelled gun, you will know about it if you're paying attention. If you still get hit by it, well, you should have moved. Then, of course, there's the other stereotype associated with artillery players in a game like World of Tanks, in that they just sit there at the back of the map, not moving their vehicle the entire game, cup of coffee in one hand, mouse in the other, and every 30 to 40 seconds they just click the left mouse button. Well, you can certainly do that in armoured warfare, but you're not going to get very far. If you're driving an SPG in armoured warfare and you want to earn any kind of experience or cash, then you're going to have to actually move the vehicle in order to provide effective fire support and get the kind of line of fire that you need to hit the targets that your team needs you to hit. Or at least that's the theory. I'm sure we'll see how it actually works out in real life, but that is certainly what the game designers are aiming for, and the way that they're designing the game and the maps is intended to reflect that. So we shall see. The proof of the pudding, as they say, is in the tasting. So, what else is different about armoured warfare? Well, unlike every other game of this genre on the market, War Thunder, World of Tanks, the vehicles that you have access to in games like that depend entirely on the nationalities that you've chosen to pursue through the tech trees. It's a logical system, it's easy to understand, and it works very well at first, but then you start running into problems once you've exhausted your Russian, German, French, British and American tank lines. You really start to struggle to try to fill up a tech tree all the way from Tier 1 to Tier 10. World of Tanks ran into this problem with the Chinese. They were introduced ages ago. We still haven't seen a single Chinese tank destroyer or self-propelled gun. And they're having this problem with the Japanese as well. And this is one of the reasons why there are a lot of people on the EU server in World of Tanks who have been campaigning for a combined European tech tree, because it's one of the only ways of fleshing out a full tank line all the way from Tier 1 to Tier 10. And still being able to cover all the bases of light tank, medium tank, tank destroyer, self-propelled gun and heavy tank. The Czechoslovakian armaments industry, for example, produced some fantastic designs prior to and during World War II. Unfortunately, that only takes you up to around about Tier 7, maybe Tier 8. After World War II, they were part of the Warsaw Pact, and the Czechoslovakian armaments industry was purely pumping out Soviet designs. But then there were other nations, Sweden for example, that produced some fantastic tanks, but not enough to populate an entire Swedish tech tree. If they were to combine all of the vehicles produced in Europe, for example, maybe they could introduce another line of tanks in the world of tanks. That included everything: light tanks, medium tanks, heavy tanks, tank destroyers and SPGs. Armoured warfare, on the other hand, bypasses the problem entirely. Instead of pursuing tank development down national lines, which is the way everybody else does it, in armoured warfare you gain access to various different tank dealers. And those dealers can have access to tanks of a whole range of different nationalities. So what that means is that if, for example, the developers wanted to drop the Israeli Merkava main battle tank into the game, they don't have to design an entire Israeli tech tree around it. Instead, they just put the Merkava into the game and give access to it to whichever dealers specialise in main battle tanks. So what else is different about Armoured Warfare? Well, this probably shouldn't come as any surprise given that it is Obsidian Entertainment who are developing this game, but it's also going to come with a very strong PvE content. You're going to be able to join up with a bunch of friends and play through cooperatively in multi-map campaign missions, where the team will have one objective on each map, but you will also have individual objectives. For example, you might be driving an armoured reconnaissance vehicle, and the individual objective of locating the enemy artillery pops up. But that's just one example, I'm sure you get the general idea. Now, the kind of missions, objective-based missions that you're going to get on these cooperative campaign maps are pretty varied. You've got your standard capture a certain number of points objective. You may have an objective to completely destroy all of the AI tanks, or you may have the objective to destroy just one particular AI tank, but it's going to be a tough AI tank, almost like a mini-boss. You're going to have to work together as a team to take him out. You may have to defend a certain number of points. You may have to survive against increasing waves of enemy vehicles until the mission timer runs out. And of course, if the whole idea of playing this kind of PvE co-op content just leaves you cold, then you are perfectly at liberty to not do any of it and just carry on playing random PvP battles exactly the same way that you do in World of Tanks and War Thunder. The final thing that sets Armoured Warfare apart from the competition is to do with crew. And again, given that this is coming from Obsidian Entertainment, it shouldn't be any surprise that they're introducing a lot of sort of role-playing game, character development concepts into the game. The crews of your tanks are going to be tied to the tanks. You're going to be able to develop the crew's skills, but you're not going to be able to move those crews from one tank to the next. The tank commanders, on the other hand, are an entirely different kettle of fish. You'll start the game with 3 tank commanders available to you. Those tank commanders are going to be what are known as generalists. In other words, they're able to take command of a whole range of different types and classes of tanks, but their skills are not going to be able to be developed that far. They're going to be kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. But as you play through the game, you're going to unlock access to other tank commanders with different characteristics who are able to have their skills developed a hell of a lot further than a generalist tank commander, but are limited to a much greater degree in the kind of tanks and the tiers of tanks which they're going to be able to command. So at one end of the scale, you've got your generalist tank commanders that are going to be available to everybody. In fact, you get 3 of them right at the start of the game. And while they're kind of limited in that you can't develop their skills very far, you can at least put them in most of the tanks that you have. At the other end of the scale, you've got your master tank commanders who have the potential to have their skills developed to an amazing degree, but they're limited in that you can only use them in 3 different tanks. So choose wisely. So that, in a nutshell, is Armoured Warfare, or at least what they want Armoured Warfare to be, and I am getting very excited about it. Not least because, well, it's not long to go now before Armoured Warfare actually goes into beta test, and 500,000 people have signed up for it and are eagerly waiting for their chance to get in. But before it goes into proper beta, they're running what they're calling a limited technical beta. Now, the limited technical beta is running between the 22nd and the 25th of January this month. It's very, very limited in scope. Only 5 of the huge range of vehicles that are going to be in the game are in the limited technical beta, 1 from each class. It also features no PvE content whatsoever. It's just 2 PvP maps. It's only running for 3 days, and the number of people with access to the limited technical beta is, well, extremely limited. I'm one of them. So that's nice. And yes, this does mean that you can expect to see some honest-to-goodness actual Armoured Warfare gameplay video towards the end of January. So we've got that to look forward to. So, Armoured Warfare from Obsidian Entertainment, free-to-play modern tank game. What's not to like? And of course, if you get yourself signed up to the beta test prior to the 18th of January, even if your beta test application is unsuccessful and you don't get into the beta, you still get a free tank commander out of it, an exclusive tank commander that you can't get anywhere else for you to use when the game goes live. You literally have nothing to lose, and if not everything, at least a free tank commander to gain. Links in the video description, as always. And coming up anytime after the limited technical beta has concluded on the 25th of January, I will be hard at work editing some actual honest-to-goodness Armoured Warfare gameplay video for you. So all that to look forward to. As always, folks, hope you enjoyed the video. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.